Everybody, this is Colin Murphy from Torcana and welcome to podcast number 9. I do say this every time, but I really do have a great one for you today. This podcast was inspired by a blog I read on Zillow a while back. And now, most of you know, I've been working in the real estate industry for probably 12 years now, and it must be true that this period must be among the most disruptive in its entire 300 year history. I mean, if you were to summarize the last 10 years in a nutshell, you'd probably say huge boom, followed by huge bust, followed by strong recovery, with some lessons learned and many others completely forgotten. That leaves out quite a lot of detail, but what I'm going to try and do today is condense the top 10 real estate stories of the past 10 years into this podcast. I hope you enjoy it. So, what is the top real estate story? Real estate story number 1 is, of course, the huge market collapse. So there was this huge housing bubble between 2001 and 2007, fueled by subprime mortgages, low interest rates, federal policies to promote affordable housing. You know, that whole idea that everybody should have their own home. Everybody should have the right to own a home. Everybody should aim to own a home, which is completely misguided. That bubble burst in 2008. I think Washington Mutual was the first big domino to fall when they declared bankruptcy, and house prices pretty much started dropping dramatically after that. The states with the biggest crashes would have been Florida and Las Vegas because they had the biggest booms, and is worth remembering that collapse resulted in millions of foreclosures, and it contributed significantly to the Great Recession. I mean, the Great Recession wasn't all about the real estate, but real estate was certainly a big part of it. Homeowners across the country lost their savings, their investments, their retirement packages as home values depreciated. It really was an incredibly disruptive and stressful period for many ordinary people. I mean, to be honest, I consider myself quite lucky to have avoided it personally. I mean, I'm basically, if I was 10 years older, I would have been caught right in the middle of that real estate bubble. But the fact was that back in 2003 and 4 and 5, I was just starting out in my real estate career. You know, I was just getting organized, getting married, buying my first home, having kids. So I literally didn't have enough money to invest in real estate during the boom. If I did, I absolutely would have got involved. I just consider myself demographically lucky to have missed that. I know a lot of my peers would have been caught. A lot of people, you know, my age, my late 30s, would have bought houses in places like Ireland and England during the boom, got caught out badly, and certainly that happened to millions and millions and millions of Americans during that. So the market collapse was unquestionably the biggest story in the US market in the past 10 years. Followed closely behind that would have been the federal takeover of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. That happened in September 2008 when they took, inverted commas, temporary control of these government-sponsored enterprises. You know, these were the companies that insured a huge volume of mortgages, which has increased a lot since the boom. They're insuring far more mortgages now than they ever did then. But they were publicly traded or private. They were traded in the stock market at the time. The stock market prices plunged after the collapse of the housing market. They were far too important to be allowed to fail. It would have destabilized the American economy entirely. So there was $187 billion federal bailout of those two entities. It drew a lot of criticism concerning how involved the government should be in housing finance, whether those housing entities should even exist in the first place. But I mean, it's all well and good to have these, philosophical discussions about what the government should be involved in and whether these entities will exist. But the truth was that if they were too important to fail, you couldn't let those houses collapse, because you would have had a collapse of pretty much the entire US mortgage market and possibly the global mortgage market afterwards. So, those two entities continue to guarantee well over half of new home mortgages, not old ones. I'm talking about new home mortgages, and they're the guys that protect your 30-year fixed interest rate. That's if it wasn't for those two entities, you wouldn't be getting your 30-year fixed interest rate. So that is a huge story, and it's far from over. And number 3 in the last 10 years, getting away from the crisis for a little bit, is just how important the internet is as a major lead generator for home buyers and renters. I mean, it's hard to believe, but 10 years ago, home buyers were still using newspapers and magazines to find properties. I used to work in the real estate publishing industry. I used to sell advertising in real estate magazines and space in real estate exhibitions back in the early 2000s. So everything has changed since then. Those business models were devastated by the crash and they never recovered. So, back in the early 2000s and before that, detailed real estate information was only available to professionals like realtors and brokers. And even then, the data wasn't anywhere near as comprehensive as what's available to people today. So buying and selling and renting a home in 2016 is a far more transparent process thanks to websites like Zillow, for example, that put your property details, market trends, historic tax records, price records, rental history, and other value information at your fingertips. I mean, Americans are very lucky to have that. Most countries do not have anything like the information you have on Zillow and Trulia, and most markets are nowhere near as transparent as the US property market, and the internet has completely revolutionized it. So the internet is now where home buyers and home renters go to look at their properties. I mean, that sounds like the most obvious thing in the world. I mean, of course it is. Of course they go to the internet. But that's new. That didn't happen 10 years ago. People used to scroll through the property listings, used to buy the newspapers every day and look at what's listed. Nobody would dream of doing that now. I mean, I certainly wouldn't do it. I look at 30 deals a day. The internet. I couldn't do my job without the internet. I couldn't look at any properties without that. But that's new. That's a big deal in the last 10 years. Number 4 on my list is that mortgage rates hit historic lows. I mean, the actual lowest of the low would have been back in November 2012 when the average interest rate for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage reached 3.3%. I mean, America is different from Europe. In Europe, there is no fixed mortgages for 30 years. You can obviously get a 30-year mortgage, but it's a variable rate. You'll get it fixed for a year or two at most. So to be able to get a 30-year fixed mortgage for 3.5%, it's incredible. And it was because the economy was struggling at the time, and the government basically had policies aimed at stimulating the housing market, and that resulted in mortgage rates that were highly affordable to home buyers and, of course, investors. So there was even programs to encourage homeowners to refinance at lower rates, and home prices grew because of that. These mortgage rates are a big reason why house prices across the US in every metro area, except for a couple, have been growing for about 5 years now. Mortgage rates are a big part of that. Another big story the last 10 years, huge story, is that Detroit declared bankruptcy. That was back in July 2013. It filed the largest municipal bankruptcy in US history. And, the city's real estate market reflected its dismal economy. The population had shrunk to a mere 700,000 people in 2012. There were well over 100,000 homes sitting vacant. Many others were looking at foreclosure. So, in fairness, they did exit bankruptcy in 2014, but their housing market, it continues to be plagued by negative equity and falling home values. There's a lot of rubbish out there about how great Detroit is for investment, how the returns are really high. Any local Detroit investors, absolutely, there's lots of money to be made. But these emails, a lot of out-of-state and overseas people are getting, promising these 15-20% returns for these great $70,000 and $80,000 Detroit houses. I mean, buyer beware in a big time. That city, in general, with a few hot spots aside, a few success stories aside, that city is still in a lot of trouble. Number 6 in my list and is how federal and local agencies have been rebuilding the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina. Obviously, Hurricane Katrina was in 2004. It was the worst storm in US history. But it's worth giving you a few figures about it just to outline how big it was and how much of an impact it was. It created more than $100 billion in damages. It displaced more than 1 million people. It destroyed more than 1 million homes. Obviously, rebuilding 1 million homes. It's incredible. I mean, obviously that will take many, many years and will forever change the the whole look and cultural heritage of that great Gulf Coast region. So, there has been a revival in the region's real estate market. It is starting to bounce back. New Orleans is an amazing city. Everybody should visit New Orleans a couple of times. I mean, I'm so happy that they decided to rebuild it, and that they're doing the right things to kind of guard against a flood like that happening again. So 10 years on, there's a lot of signs for hope and renewal in that area, and a lot of new homes being built after that terrible tragedy. But that was a big deal. That's a huge, obviously it's a huge people story first and foremost, but it's also a huge real estate story, and certainly one of the biggest in the last 10 years. Number 7 is that, thankfully, people stopped getting so obsessed with buying these oversized homes. I mean, I remember it so well. I mean, especially in places like Florida, we're probably more guilty than others, where you had people looking for a vacation home, maybe, husband, wife, and 2 kids. A 3-bed, 2-bath would have been perfectly fine for a vacation home, but because of the times that they were living in, they end up getting a 5-bed home with a pool and a back garden. I mean, people bought houses that were just ridiculously big. I mean, obviously, the bigger your house is, the more expensive it is to heat it and maintain it. And, the preference for smaller, more efficient living spaces is one of the consequences of the crash, that people are happier with more modest houses. And I'm very, very happy with that. I myself live in a relatively small house, and there's no reason. I have friends that have these huge houses, and they're just so expensive and so unnecessary. I much prefer a small, cozy property. And if renters are no different, renters don't need 1,800 square feet. If you have a nice property, well renovated, well maintained, people are happy with 11, 12, 1,300 square feet all day long. So, I think that's a big change. I mean, that's here to stay. It's going to be a while before people get obsessed with this bigger is better. I mean, that paradigm is gone. Smaller is better, and hopefully that'll be here to stay. Number 8 on my list, and I've mentioned this in a couple of blogs earlier in the year, is that millennials are people basically born after 1980. So millennials and baby boomers, especially retiring baby boomers, are actually driving a lot of migration back into the cities, back into the urban areas. So, America's metro areas have been growing since 2010. That spurred a boom in the construction of multifamily homes. It's driven up demand for housing. I see it a lot in downtown St. Petersburg and in Tampa Bay. A lot of new construction happening because of millennials. And it's really just a result of the millennials, these younger people. They prefer, many of whom, or most of whom rent, by the way. They prefer shorter commutes. They want to be close to their work. They want the flexibility of moving around a little bit. And baby boomers as well, funnily enough, is that they want to return to the urban centres they left 40 years ago to raise their families. They don't need to live out in the suburbs now. A lot of those guys are moving back into city centres, close to the parks and close to, lots of the amenities that they like. So that's actually a big demographic trend. I mean, there's clearly always going to be demand for houses in the suburbs. I mean, the millennials might have their specific needs, but when those guys start turning 30 and getting into their mid-30s, they want the same thing everyone else is, which is a house with a garden to start a family, and that's going to continue. I see it continue. That's not going to change, but it is a trend where you're having younger people that are renting for longer, and then certain retiring baby boomers that are leaving their big houses in the suburbs and going to smaller ones in more central areas with more amenities and less hassle with commuting. Number 9 on the list is real estate shows. I mean, how many real estate shows are out there? It's incredible. Doesn't matter where you live. I mean, obviously, if you're in the States, you have HGTV, you have a bunch of dedicated 24/7 TV channels. But 10 years ago, you didn't have a proliferation of TV shows. I mean, in fairness, they did prove that home buying and renovating could be serious entertainment. These are very popular shows. There's loads of them. There's $1 Million Listing, Trading Places, Extreme Makeover. I mean, there's literally dozens of them, and some of them are actually quite enjoyable. Every now and again, I sit down and indulge myself in a couple of TV shows. I mean, they're clearly they're clearly not realistic. They don't paint an accurate picture of what running a business, buying and renovating and selling properties is by a long shot. But they're entertaining, and it's a new thing over the past decade. I mean, for a lot of people, this is this has turned into a national pastime, watching people remodel homes and turn them into really nice properties. So that's funny to me, but they're entertaining shows. That's a new thing. It seems funny to me that you have a real estate crash, and one of the side effects is a proliferation of real estate shows and how to fix up properties and build new properties. But go figure. They're a big deal, and they're a lot of fun. Number 10 on my list is over the last 10 years is the return of cash buyers and massive portfolio builders. I mean, clearly 10 years ago, you didn't have a lot of people buying houses with cash, but now you've huge numbers of people, mostly investors, of course, that do build, that are buying with cash. I mean, in Florida, for several years in a row, you'd well over 40% of all transactions were cash transactions. You had people like Blackstone, this huge company that literally have bought hundreds of thousands of single family homes. There are several companies in the US that have well over 100,000 homes, and literally their only purpose is to buy them, get them fixed up, and rent them out, and pay their investors dividends from the rental income. That's their business model. I mean, Warren Buffett a few years ago famously said, if I could figure out a way to buy a few hundred single family homes, I'd do it, because I think it's a great investment. And people have, by the looks of it, figured out how to do it. I mean, obviously I can't imagine how difficult it is. I mean, I find it difficult to buy 5 or 6 a month, and some of these companies have mandates to buy hundreds every month, and clearly they're going to be making a lot of mistakes. A lot of the people that are doing the work are based out of state, and they're getting local people to run around. They're overpaying for a lot of prices. I see it in Tampa Bay. There's certain areas I just won't go near because there's too many of the inverted commas big boys just overpaying for properties. But the cash buyers is absolutely a huge story in the last 10 years, and the big hedge funds, the pension funds, the private companies, they've been making a huge impact all across the country. I mean, not just Florida, not just Atlanta, literally all across the country in every property type. Some of them specialize in low income areas, some of them specialize in grade A office space. You have everything, and whether we like it or not, guys like me, we're competing with them. My job is to try and get a good property at a low, below market value, fix it up to slightly higher than average, and resell it resell it turnkey to investors that are looking to make a good return. So, we've found very good niches for doing that, but it's competitive market. So let me just recap on those top 10 stories. First one, the collapse of the market. Second one, the federal takeover of Fannie and Freddie. Number 3, internet became a major lead generator for buyers and renters. Number 4, mortgage rates hit historic lows. Number 5, Detroit declared bankruptcy. Number 6, the federal and local efforts to rebuild the Gulf Coast after Katrina. Number 7, people stopped getting so obsessed with bigger houses. Number 8, the millennials and the baby boomers started driving migration back into urban areas, which caused new construction in a lot of urban areas. Number 9, real estate TV shows proved that our industry can provide serious entertainment. And number 10 was the return of the cash buyers and the massive portfolio builders. So I hope you like that. Before I sign off, there's something else I want to talk about briefly, is that what I've noticed is that there's a lot of investors out there that have to combat their fair share of naysayers. A lot of people out there have this real urge to begin a real estate career and begin just not even a career, just to invest in real estate part-time, to build up a couple of rental properties. And normally enough, you're going to talk to the people closest to you, you're going to tell your friends and family about your plans, and often, the biggest critics out there are people that aren't investors. But people that are very quick to say, oh, tenants are a real pain, or just make these ominous predictions that you lose your shirt. I mean, these are guys that almost always have your best interests at heart, but they're not actually the ones who are researching real estate. I mean, you know that real estate can be a great way to protect wealth, combat inflation, earn a passive income. There's no question that that's the case. The only question is, are you able to do the due diligence necessary, set aside the time necessary to research everything, and then just go and do it? I mean, keeping other people's fears from infecting your drive to invest can be a challenge, particularly when they come from close friends and family members. I mean, I've been lucky. I mean, I've been in real estate, 12 years. My friends and family haven't been particularly involved. That I've been doing my own thing, surrounding myself with people that are in the same business, that have the same mindset, and it's been fine. Been very happy. But I recently finished a very well-known book called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor, and it has this large section at the back with mini biographies of different people that became successful investors. And one of the ones that stuck me was this story of a young woman called Renata Serthio, who was told by her father just after she graduated college. She went to her father, said, I want to buy a rental property. She would have been 21 or 2. And her dad said, yeah, I know you want to do it, and I understand that, but I think you're too young. She approached him literally for a loan for the down payment on her first rental property, and he said, not now, you're too young. And a lot of people would have got a bit disheartened by that. They would have just, got grumpy and gone off in a bad mood and focused on something else. But to her credit, this young lady, she took it in her stride. She had the best answer possible. She said, okay, I know that, I know how you feel, but I just wanted to give you first refusal on lending me my down payment. And then she went ahead and found the funds elsewhere. And you fast forward 10 years, she now owns 5 single family homes, 2 duplexes, 6 condos, and an 18-unit apartment building. I mean, it's just a great little story. She clearly had the drive to do it, no matter the advice from other people that had their best interests at heart. And just wanted to finish with that nice little story. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Your feedback's always very welcome. I'd love it if you could leave me a comment on iTunes or Android if you do enjoy the podcast. And any ideas you have for future podcasts would certainly be welcome. I'm happy to consider anything. If you want to contact me, my name's Colin Murphy. You can reach me on 727-302-1422. That's 727-302-1422. Our website is torcana.com. My email address is colin.murphy@torcana.com. And that's it. I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much for listening. This recording contains general information relating to the real estate market, and it is for educational purposes only. Buyers should always seek appropriate legal, tax, and financial advice from suitably qualified professionals before entering into any real estate transaction. Actual returns from rental properties will always vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. While we have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of any guests on our show, we do not warrant their accuracy. Opinions of the host are not necessarily shared by other employees and partners of Torcana and its subsidiaries.